And a warm greetings to our esteemed speakers and all of you who have joined us from different time zones. The session will be recording and is a public webinar. Welcome to the International Anti-Corruption Court, short for IACC Youth Talks, which is led by the Youth Leaders Network of Integrity Initiatives International. Today, we are gathered and united in one aim to live in a world where corruption is fully eradicated. The IACC Youth Talks serve as our avenue to ignite awareness, spur action, and to promote commitment towards holding leaders accountable and to create a world that is just and fair for all. In today's discussion, we will get an insight into what is the IACC, why is it needed, what impact will it have locally and globally, how are the youth impacted, and what role can the youth play in the IACC campaign. We'll also get an update on the IACC treaty drafting process. Last but not least, we will hear about the progress to date of IACC and the next steps. These will all be moderated through Q&A sessions. Our goal of the IACC Youth Talks is clear: to empower the youth globally, fostering a collective force that advocates for accountability, transparency, and ethical governance. The IACC Youth Talks serves as a catalyst, amplifying the urgency of addressing corruption and laying the foundation for sustained efforts on both local and global scale, emphasizing the role of the youth and the impact they can have in this process. Please note that we will be holding the IACC Youth Talks on the last Wednesdays of each month. There will be 3 more talks following this talk. In May, we will conclude these talks and transition into a workshop where we will ideate the next steps, strategy, and action plan. Now, allow me to introduce our amazing moderator, Carly Cabot, a first-year Juris Doctor degree candidate, global law scholar, and international economic law fellow at Georgetown Law. Carly is a driving force and an active member of our Youth Leaders Network, and she will be introducing our fantastic lineup of speakers, as well as she will be leading us through the Q&A session today. Without any further ado, the floor is yours, Carly.
Thank you so much. So I have the privilege of introducing our speakers, and we will be starting with Serena Ibrahim. Serena is the founder of IACC Youth Against Corruption, a youth-led organization that aims to prevent and control corruption through youth talents, social innovation, and social entrepreneurship. She also works with governmental and non-governmental organizations as a consultant for sustainability and smart cities projects. Serena has a master's degree in architecture and international master's degree in sustainable territorial development. Her interest in corruption emerged from the fact that she was born and raised in Lebanon, a country where systemic corruption has dreadful impacts on the life of youth. Today, she is committed to fighting for a more sustainable and fair future for victims of corrupt systems and to create an international movement of youth who have the humility, creativity, and courage to break the corruption chain. In June 2021, Serena was selected by the President of the General Assembly to deliver a youth statement, summarizing a special session of the General Assembly against corruption. She also currently serves as an Integrity Advisory Board member for UNODC's GRACE Initiative. Without further ado, Serena will be speaking on the profound impact of corruption on youth, insights from personal experiences, and founding IACC. Serena, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Carly, and thank you, Triple I, for hosting these talks. It's very nice to meet everyone virtually, and hopefully you'll have the chance to meet maybe one day in person. So today I would like to talk a bit on what drove this passion for the fight against corruption, how we started with IACC, why we started with IACC, and why we are such advocates and we are really pushing for the establishment of the anti-corruption court, and why do we think it's important for us as youth to play a very big role in mobilizing our talents in the fight against corruption. A brief view, everyone, on like the circumstances that Lebanese youth are going through. So in the past year, studies have been done more focused on youth in Lebanon, and the numbers were a bit shocking. 1 out of 4 youth in Lebanon are depressed, based on a UNDP study. Youth unemployment has reached up to 60%. Working youth have an average salary of around $64 per month. And the last study showed that more than 75% wish to emigrate. And yesterday, as you most probably all of you know, there was the 2023 score for the Corruption Perception Index was out, and Lebanon scored 140 out of 180 countries in corruption in public administrations. So you can imagine that we had a very, let's say, rich land for us to start working on a Youth Against Corruption project. And the idea was to leverage youth talent, social innovation, social entrepreneurship, and collective intelligence in the fight against corruption, because we believed and we saw a lot that traditional ways of fighting corruption were not efficient and were not enough. So we took this promise on ourselves together with the community to design together more creative solutions to spreading knowledge around this topic and thinking together on what projects can we create to tackle the problem in its core. So here maybe we will be able to talk more about the 3 programs we focus on, which are the Academy that focuses on anti-corruption education, the Accelerator that focuses on innovation against corruption, and the Activism that mobilizes youth talents in the fight against corruption. We're going to go through very fast examples of projects we have done in the past years, from which the YAC time, which are anti-corruption awareness sessions that we do in public spaces, coffee shops, universities, anywhere where youth come together in Lebanon to discuss corruption in different socioeconomic sectors. In another program, we tackled the interrelation between sports and corruption, because after COVID specifically, the interest in sports increased a lot in Lebanon, and most probably it did in several countries as well. We did a project on the interrelation between corruption and environment as well, which was called the REACT project. It was one of the biggest environmental forums in the country, and we have done a national hackathon on fighting corruption in public administrations. We have developed as well a course called the FAS Education. It's the first anti-corruption awareness course that was done by young people with the help of experts in universities from around the world, from the US, from France, from Belgium, from Germany, from Lebanon. And the idea was to say to youth that we might think that learning about corruption is something that is very hard, that it might be far from us, or it might be something only for law students or political science students or international affairs students. And we did this course to prove to everyone that it doesn't matter your background, it doesn't matter your interest. You can learn about this topic in an interactive, in a simple, and in a creative way. And we are planning, hopefully, to be able to make this course mandatory in schools and universities while collaborating with the public sector institutions. This year, and I'm gonna end with this year's project because I think it will get us closer to why we are working closely with III on advocating for the establishment of this court. This year, we said to ourselves and that okay, it's very important to spread knowledge. It's very important to know more about corruption, to create courses, to do projects about about corruption in different sectors. But if trust between youth and their governmental representatives will remain being broken, and if dialogue does not exist and exchange of ideas, of concerns or dreams or visions for the country are not part of our agenda, it will be very hard to restore this broken trust with time, and it will be very hard to have really sustainable change when it comes to the fight against corruption. So this year we launched a project called In Their Shoes, and the idea of this project was to put youth in the shoes of governmental representatives and governmental representatives in the shoes of youth, and to discuss together what could be potential solutions to national challenges. So these are the projects that we are working on a national level. In parallel, when we met Ian and Judge Wolf 3 years ago, and when we knew about the proposition of the International Anti-Corruption Court, it was very clear to us, and I understand because many of you on this call, of course, since you have created such organizations in your country, it means you have been victim of corruption directly or indirectly, whether nationally, regionally, and globally. And we truly believe that in order to have a more sustainable, fair, and just future, fighting locally alone is not enough. Pushing only on awareness is not enough. We need a stronger force to hold kleptocrats in nations where youth are paying the price accountable for what they are doing, for the decisions they are taking, and for the impacts that they are having on the daily lives of youth. And this is why this is how we became part of the Youth Leadership Network. And last year I became part of the board of III, because we believe that youth have a very important and crucial role to play in pushing for the establishment of such a court. Today, we're very happy to have our first talk in this network about this court, because it's very important for us to know what this court consists of, why it's important, what impact it can have on our lives, how can we use the platform or this court to voice out challenges in our nations, or maybe to report very big corrupt incidents, or to be able to have a platform where we can shed light on kleptocrats and put them under the spotlight. Even if we are young still, even if we don't have the anti-corruption background, as it was said earlier, I'm an architect, so I really come from a very different background, but it was a conscious decision to learn more about it. And I'm very glad that we have this forum to learn together about this court and to check together, hopefully by end of this call, on what we can do to build on this court and move forward. Thank you, Margila.
Thank you so much, Serena, for sharing that. I'm sure people will have many questions about your projects, but it really is such a great example of how much creativity and innovation can do in the fight against corruption. So thank you for that. Next up, we have Justice Richard Goldstone. Justice Goldstone is a former South African judge, having served on the bench for 23 years. The last 9 of those years, he was a justice of the Constitutional Court. He is an honorary bencher of the Inner Temple, London, and an honorary fellow of St. John's College in Cambridge. He is also an honorary member of the Association of the Bar of the City of New York, an international member of the American Academy of the Arts and Sciences, an honorary life member of the International Bar Association, and honorary president of its Human Rights Institute. From August 1994 to September 1996, Justice Goldstone was the chief prosecutor of the United Nations International Criminal Tribunals for the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. Since retiring from the bench, he has taught as a visiting professor in a number of United States law schools, the Central European University in Budapest, and Oxford University. In 2021, Justice Goldstone chaired the independent expert review of the International Criminal, established by its Assembly of States Parties. He studied law at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, where he obtained a BA LLB degree with honors in 1962. Together with Judge Mark Wolf and other colleagues, he created Integrity Initiatives International in 2016. We are very happy to have Justice Goldstone with us, and he will be discussing unveiling the IACC, why is there a need for the IACC, and updates on the treaty drafting process. So we'll be doing this a little bit differently. We will be doing this as a Q&A, and then after we're finished with all the speakers, we'll get into the rest of the discussion. Justice Goldstone, are you ready to begin?
Sure. So thank you very much for inviting me to join this inaugural session of this very inspiring group. And I really am awed by Serena's description of the organization she has founded. She is busy, and I really congratulate her, because it's the youth, I think, that will determine the success of the whole endeavor to establish an international anti-corruption court. Carly, thank you very much for moderating the panel. Thank you for your introduction, and I'm happy to respond to any questions you want to put to me.
Great. Let's start with you launching Integrity Initiatives International in 2016. What at that moment made you decide that it was time?
Well, I met Judge Mark Wolf quite by chance when we were both on vacation at Martha's Vineyard in the United States. And he put to me his idea of the necessity for an international anti-corruption court, really because there is a complete vacuum in the international world. There are domestic forms of anti-corruption which have been directed by the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, known as UNCAC, UNCAC. And many nations have joined UNCAC. In fact, today there are over 190 parties to UNCAC, of whom about 182 are governments. So it means that there is just about universal support for UNCAC. There are two problems. Firstly, many countries that have ratified UNCAC have not carried out the instructions given by that convention. In other words, they're parties to it, but they ignore the detail. The majority, however, have passed legislation, domestic legislation, incorporating into their domestic law the provisions of the United Nations Convention. But unfortunately, many other countries, even those who have done so, simply ignore it. So it suits them to be members of UNCAC, but it suits them also not to apply the terms to stop corruption in their own countries. My own country is one example of that. We've had tremendous crime at the highest level in our country, notwithstanding very good laws dealing with corruption. So that is the one problem, but the other is that there are huge amounts being laundered from around the world. The latest figures, they're probably conservative, is that there's about $7 trillion in secret offshore accounts. $7 trillion in secretive offshore accounts. Money laundering accounts annually for about $1.6 trillion US. And in Africa alone, about $100 billion are stolen from public funds. So it's a huge problem. It's not a new problem. And when Mark Wolf put this to me way back in 2016, the Panama Papers had then recently come out, and that showed the huge money laundering and corruption that there was around the world. Finally, I'd been made aware of the depth of corruption way back in 2004 when I first started teaching in the United States, and I was asked by the then Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, to join the former head of the Federal Reserve Bank, Paul Volcker, in investigating the infamous oil for food corruption that took place in the late 1990s, when there was just huge corruption from within in Iraq. Saddam Hussein's government took huge amounts in bribes, and there were many countries around the world. There were participants in the honeypot that was created by the oil for food. So it wasn't difficult for Judge Wolf to talk me into joining him and others in forming Integrity Initiatives International, III. Sorry, that's a long answer to a simple question.
And no, it's very helpful. And I think it kicks us right into the next question of, from your perspective of being on the bench for 23 years, why is the IACC so needed? What experiences on the bench maybe shaped your view on that?
Well, one thing I think we can all agree on, and that is the more efficient a criminal justice system, the lower the crime rate will be. In a country where you don't have a criminal justice system, where you have a very weak criminal justice system, the crime rate is sky high. In countries where you have efficient criminal justice system, there's still crime. You'll never stop all crime. But in countries where there's an efficient criminal justice system, police, prosecutors, courts, the crime rate is lower. So certainly criminal justice does act as a deterrent. And that's one thing I've certainly learned in my very long career in the law. And the same would apply, I have no doubt, in the international community with good international anti-corruption system.
Great. And also, I want to talk now about the fact that many international courts that have been created face criticisms for not fulfilling their potential. You bring up some great points about why we need an international anti-corruption court, but how do you think that an international anti-corruption court will be different? What are some of the key differences between the IACC and other international courts like the ICJ?
Well, they're very serious problems that make it difficult for international courts to be successful. Perhaps the most important is that they cannot function without the cooperation of governments. So if governments want to put a spoke in the wheel of international courts, whether criminal or civil courts, whatever international courts, it's very difficult for the people running the courts to operate without full government cooperation. No international court, in fact, no domestic court, has got its own force, police force or army to enforce its rulings and to enforce its orders. It relies on government. That's one of the difficulties. Then too, with any human institution, obviously there are mistakes that are made. Time is taken. The problem is that I think the public expects justice to be delivered tomorrow, and it's a long, slow, difficult process in which you need great expertise and a tremendous amount of work. An international anti-corruption court would have a huge advantage that, for example, the International Criminal Court or other international criminal courts don't have. And that is the ability, if countries like the UK, Singapore, United Arab Emirates, there are many countries around the world in which money is laundered. The UK is a good example. The number of expensive properties in the most select areas of London that are held by kleptocrats, that are held by oligarchs. It's very well known, and the same is true in a number of countries. If those countries would join in the International Anti-Corruption Court, the court could very effectively lay its hands on those illicit funds. It could obviously, by definition, have the support of the governments concerned, and I'm sure that countries like Switzerland, like the United Kingdom, are not particularly keen on having these illicit funds ending up on their shores. So I think there's every prospect of getting cooperation. And of course, governments are going to be concerned about being named and shamed if they don't cooperate. So that is one advantage. The other I'd mention, it's been mentioned, I'm heading a committee of integrity initiatives international, which is busy drafting a model treaty for the International Anti-Corruption Court. And one of the exciting ideas we're looking at is having a court of two chambers. There'll obviously be the criminal chamber, which will deal with kleptocrats. The idea is that we will only go against leaders of countries who are stealing their people's money. And of course, the people who cooperate with them, the banks, the lawyers, the real estate agents, the financial providers. Those will be the people that we'll want to go against in the International Anti-Corruption Court. So we'll have a criminal chamber dealing with that. And then there'll be a second chamber, a civil chamber, which will deal with the illicit funds, with the laundered funds, which will be able to seek orders to freeze and possibly repurpose those funds. And it will also, interestingly, I think, deal with any disputes. There are bound to be disputes between the country where the money was stolen and the country where it's been laundered. And the civil chamber will be able to play a very important role in dealing with those disputes, in identifying the stolen funds, and helping governments decide what should be done with those funds. So I think it would be a very different court, for example, to the International Criminal Court. It would be a much slimmer model. It would be less expensive, and in many ways it will learn lessons from the problems and perhaps the over complication of some of the practices in the International Criminal Court.
Thank you. That's a very helpful overview, and I think leaves me and hopefully others feeling very hopeful. I want to go back for a moment and talk about your experience as chief prosecutor for the UN's International Criminal Tribunals. How can the IACC leverage international cooperation to address these cross-border corruption cases most effectively?
Well, as I mentioned, Connie, one thing you can be sure, the kleptocrats, the dishonest leaders of states are not going to join the court. They're going to do everything indeed they can to avoid the court being involved in their countries. But the importance for the International Anti-Corruption Court will be to get the cooperation of the countries where the funds end up. And if those funds can be seized, it's going to be a huge disincentive for the kleptocrats to steal money. Because one thing too, you can be sure, kleptocrats don't keep the money at home. They don't know how long they're going to be in power, and this is the reason they send these illicit funds overseas to countries where they think they're going to be safe. So you can see it's a whole intricate web that I think will be able to be effectively dealt with by an international anti-corruption court.
And how do you foresee the IACC contributing to strengthening the rule of law globally? And what challenges do you think we might encounter in doing that?
Well, the rule of law is important. Without the rule of law, there can be no justice. There can be no real benefit for the victims. And in the case of kleptocracy, in the case of funds being stolen from a country, the victims are the poor people of that country in particular. When Navi Pillay, my fellow South African, was the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, she made two statements. Firstly, she said that corruption kills. Corruption kills because it causes starvation in many countries that are the victims of kleptocracy. And the second thing she said, and this was over a decade ago, she said the amount stolen each year would feed the poor of the world 80 times over. So we're looking at really a huge human rights issue and not simply a financial issue. and the rule of law is very much involved with that.
And that's a really good point, how it is connected to everything. And regarding the challenges, are there any specific challenges that you foresee at this point?
Well, you know, it's important to get as many governments as we can to be involved with the International Anti-Corruption Court. I know that my colleague Ian Lynch is going to deal with their campaign that he and his colleagues are directing. But we do have support from a number of governments. You'll refer to them. I would refer specifically to the Netherlands, to Canada, to Nigeria, which has declared its interest, to the United Kingdom, where the Labour Party certainly has declared its interest, to the European Union. But if we're going to get other countries, I think the important thing, one of the most important aspects, is that there should be pressure from below. There should be pressure from civil society organizations. And this is where you come in and where Serena comes in. There has to be pressure from the young people. It's their money that's being stolen. And I think they can play a huge and important role in putting pressure on their governments to join an international anti-corruption court. So I think we have to attack this from all aspects, directly speaking to governments, but importantly to get support from the bottom up.
Absolutely, and Serena is a perfect example of that. One last question before we move on to our last speaker, before opening the floor up for discussion. But given the current geopolitical landscape, what strategies can be employed to ensure the independence and to make sure that the court is impartial?
Well, let me say a few things. Virtually, in the draft model treaty, there will be provision clearly to ensure the independence of all people who work in the court. The judges, the prosecutors, the registry, the investigators, all have to be independent from outside influence, and the treaty and the rules of the court will obviously make provision to ensure that independence is respected and implemented. And there has to be, and I would stress this, there has to be transparency in an organization, an international organization, to ensure that there is complete independence. The draft treaty will make provision for the protection of whistleblowers and witnesses, and will provide witness protection. That of course is particularly important. So we are looking at all of these issues when we have a draft treaty, and we're looking at the end of this year to have a first draft out. We will be sharing it not only with governments, but also with civil society organizations, and I include yours, Serena, and others. We will be seeking input and the views of people from all levels and in all areas of civil society. We'll also, let me end by saying, we're very cognizant of the fact that if the International Anti-Corruption Court is to be a success, it cannot be, in fact or in perception, a Western or global North organization. It has to really represent all of the people of the world. Corruption knows no boundaries. There's corruption on every continent, in just about every country in the world. And it's for that reason that III has gone out of its way, and we continue to go out of our way to get input and to get support from all regions of the world. And we are succeeding. We have support not only in Europe and North America, but we have support and active participation from many people in Latin America, in Asia, and in Africa. And that, I think, is a key area that will determine our success. Thank you, Carly, for all your wonderful questions.
Thank you so much for taking the time to explain to us a little bit more about what the court would look like and sharing your insights and experiences. Next, we are going to be hearing from Ian Lynch, and Ian is going to be speaking on the IACC campaign specifics and the future plans. Ian Lynch is the Managing Director and Program Director at Integrity Initiatives International. He previously led the development of girls' education programs in Afghanistan from 2013 to 2018. His foreign policy analysis has appeared in The New Republic, Lawfare, The Diplomat, Just Security, The Strategy Bridge, and others. He holds a master's in Middle East and Central Asian Security Studies from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, and a BS in Environmental Studies from the Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources at the University of Vermont. Ian, are you ready to begin?
Thanks. Yeah, thank you, Carly, for guiding us through all these great questions, and to you and Serena, Margila, other members of our Youth Leaders Network at Integrity Initiatives International, including I see Carlos Vargas on the call as well, who really prompted the idea of having these public webinars to dive deeper into the IACC idea and the plans for it at this point, in order to particularly gear towards youth and other populations around the world, which was a fantastic idea. And just want to note for everyone that it was all of your initiative that drove towards these talks. So thank you for doing that. And also, I'm sure you have lots of questions for me, as you did Justice Goldstone, but I also just want to note that, in the grand scheme of things, like what we're trying to do at III in order to realize the creation of International Anti-Corruption Court is very much personified by my much more impressive co-panelists, Serena and Justice Goldstone, that we want to create a multi-generational movement for this court. Create an international court is no small feat and requires hundreds and eventually thousands of people around the world to be involved in getting us there. And as Justice Goldstone was discussing, to some extent, young people, civil society are the engine behind making that kind of change, and but also bring them into alliances with experts, with senior leaders, people like Justice Goldstone, all working together to accomplish these things. And that's what we've begun to do, and have much, much more work to do. So happy to answer any of your questions, Carly.
Great, thank you so much. So the first question is, right now, what are the next steps in making the IACC a reality? What is III doing to facilitate this?
Right now, there are many next steps. I think at III, we're very much students of other successful efforts led and driven by civil society movements to pursue treaty-based solutions to global or regional problems. So we're thinking back to the campaign to ban landmines in the 90s, more recently, campaigns to abolish nuclear weapons, also the coalition that worked very hard on driving the creation of the International Criminal Court. And in all those instances, the ultimate goal is needing a strong enough core of governments, state parties that are going to come together, negotiate, sign, and then ratify a treaty that brings the court into existence. But that being the ultimate goal, there's a lot of things that have to happen to get there. Many other campaigns have started with raising awareness, doing things like this webinar, although in different time periods, having to use different technologies to do so. And then building a strong coalition of civil society to work together. And we're trying at III to do as much as we can to expand the reach through raising awareness to more organizations, bring them into decision-making processes, to feedback loops as we iterate improvement of the concept. So drafting of a model treaty that Justice Goldstone is a leader of, and finding ways to create more on-ramps for more people in different parts of the world from different backgrounds to comment on it, to help us identify blind spots, to improve our design so that the idea of the court truly is one that avoids pitfalls of past international institutions and is more effective, and also serves every global region equally, and supports thereby like the delivery of public good for people around the world, and to help turn back the tide against grand corruption globally. We also have to, eventually we need states on board, so we have to be very focused on states as well and getting them involved, but not relying on any one state to make this happen. So a lot of other campaigns for big ideas have developed small core groups of their most active champions in governments, and that way, if one country, through political change, elections, anything around policy changes, then it's not that the movement loses its government momentum, that there's a core, a plank of countries reinforcing each other. And if one, for some reason, drops out unexpectedly, there's still other countries pulling in the right direction. And then on the technical side, like Justice Goldstone and I have been talking about, we need an actual treaty. We don't necessarily want to leave it up to governments to put on paper what the idea will actually look like. We want to ourselves, with a broad coalition of civil society, define what the court would look like, and so that it can work well for everyone. And by doing so, we also lower the barriers of resource allocation at foreign ministries and governments to take up such an idea, because we've already done the work of getting them a foundation that can be used to negotiate a treaty. And once there are treaty negotiations, which is a much harder thing to determine when and how that might look, at that point, we don't want to just leave the model treaty in their hands. We want to monitor it. We want to create ways to insist to make sure that civil society is in the room at the negotiations, is making sure that loopholes aren't put in, that states that may be interested in undermining things don't have the chance to do so, and continue to put the public pressure on. So really, we have to do all these things at once at this point. We initially thought about being very sequential in this, raising awareness, building a civil society coalition, with that civil society coalition drafting a model treaty, and then using all that high-level conceptual work, all of that civil society coalition building, to then pressure governments to finally take action. Shortly after we started to wade into raising awareness around the world in 2021, Canada put this idea in its foreign policy. And then the Dutch put it in its foreign policy. And then Ecuador endorsed the court, and then Nigeria, then Moldova. The European Parliament passed a resolution last year calling for the creation of the court. And there's a couple dozen other countries that are very interested. In some countries, depending on how elections go, there'll be more champions coming online soon. So in a sense, we kind of skipped ahead, if we were thinking about this sequentially, to the stage of heavy government interest and support, which is somewhat surprising for a big idea like this. But at the same time, it means now our next steps have to involve everything all at once. So there's many ways, I think, now to get involved. And I think the movement for this is going to require a lot of interesting capacities from different people and creativity.
Thank you for that. And it's astonishing to see the amount of interest that this has already garnered. I'm curious, you talked about it's a little bit difficult to determine timelines, but if there is an ideal timeline in mind, I'd be very curious to hear what that is.
Well, so there's all of these things that I just mentioned are evolving, and they're all next steps now. They're also steps that'll have to be continuously taken. So in the near term, building a civil society coalition involving more young people is a high priority. So that in 2024, greatly expanding, the who of the movement is extremely important. At the same time, because governments are already interested, to particularly that larger group of countries that are interested but maybe not committed yet, and maybe aren't saying things publicly that they're interested, having a draft model treaty will help them do so. It'll help give them comfort that, oh, this really could work. It could be a new evolution in how international law works in an international court. It could truly address the crimes of corruption that we're talking about. So we do also have this very rigorous schedule this year of working towards drafting a model treaty with a expanding group of more than 60 experts now from all parts of the world. And when you work with a pro bono group of experts, there's always coordination challenges and delays. But I do believe that towards the end of the year, we'll start being able to have a first really solid draft of a treaty that we start doing consultations with interested states, with our civil society partners. And then we move towards more public versions of the draft treaty and continually refine it. There will be tons of feedback. And so we're talking about into 2025 with having a collaborative, iterative design process of a treaty, generating conversation among states, among civil society, over the next year and a half, 2 years. And so from there, it gets really fuzzy of like, when could a court be created? And it's all about the political will and the momentum behind things. So there's 5 states right now that are publicly supportive. Like I said, many other states that are interested. You know, if a draft model treaty generates really solid civil society support, it generates enough interest out of those states, things could snowball very quickly, and maybe we can push for a diplomatic conference in 2026 or something like that, to negotiate a treaty. And then once a treaty is negotiated, then we still, as a coalition of civil society, have to push for ratifications of that treaty so that the court can come into existence. So even if we're talking about extremely ambitious timelines, which that would be very ambitious, to the actual creation of a court that has is operating and up and running, it's still a relatively, at least medium-term prospect. And you never know how these things go. With the campaign to ban landmines, there was a civil society coalition building effort for a few years. But once the Canadian government decided to champion the idea, they held one diplomatic conference in Ottawa. And at that conference, the foreign minister said, we're going to be back here in, I think it was 7 or 8 months, and we're going to sign a treaty. And that's what happened. So that's a treaty to ban landmines is a much more simple piece of work than a complex international institution, but still it could go very quickly. Others, like the campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, began in 2007, and they took about 10 years before they got to an actual treaty, and they're still working on ratifications of the key nuclear states, which that may be a very long prospect to their eventual goal of abolishing nuclear weapons. And for them, even just getting to the treaty, that happened a lot slower than they thought it would, given the experience of other campaigns. And with the International Criminal Court, it really depends on how you're thinking about it. There was sort of this moment in time with the creation and success of the International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia that Justice Goldstone was the first prosecutor of, the genocides in Rwanda and elsewhere, that gave the geopolitical moment for the creation. And there was a civil society coalition that seized on that and worked very hard and quickly. So in that sense, the court was created quite quickly. But in the other sense, a permanent court for atrocity crimes like the IACC was first proposed right after World War II. So, and it went through many moments of people campaigning here and there. So if you take that kind of lens, it took a very long time to reach that. So when we apply that to this, we have our ambitious internal goals in our movement, and we are fully committed to those, but we also have to be cognizant that this could be a long process, and one that the need will never go away. There's lots of other great initiatives in the anti-corruption space that are extremely important, and some of them might happen much faster, but they're never going to address all the gaps that are out there. And so that's why we need to keep pushing for this idea.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. We've talked a lot about the role of states and the support of states. I'm curious, especially for this call, what are some of the tangible actions that youth can take to support the establishment of an international anti-corruption court, as well as how they can get involved with Integrity Initiatives International?
The first thing they can do is write to Margila, who is hopefully putting her email in the chat. So as our Youth Leaders Network coordinator, the Youth Leaders Network at III is not just about the IACC. The program is essentially meant to be a peer-to-peer learning and support platform. A lot of young people are in countries where grand corruption, as we learned in detail from Serena, are just absolutely devastated by corruption. It can be very hard to tell what to do, where to put your positive energy into things. There can be a feeling that this is all intractable, that it's not going to change, and it will be very hard to change things. But there are people like Serena and others in our network who have just decided to start doing things, and they may not know how to be activists when they start, but they sort of just learn by doing. And so the Youth Leaders Network at III is a Chatham House Rules platform where we meet virtually online, and we discuss each other's work, how to improve it, how to deal with the inevitable challenges, how to deal with things like digital and physical safety, how to be citizen investigators, how to preserve evidence for use in a court of law if you're able to do that kind of level of citizen investigation in difficult circumstances, maybe evidence that eventually gets used at an international anti-corruption court. So there's a lot of different ways in which that programming can just provide an entry ramp for anyone who really wants to get involved in general in combating corruption around the world. And then out of that, the reason most young people discover AAA in the first place is because of the International Anti-Corruption Court campaign. And so talks like this are another way to keep learning about the IACC. Like Margiela said at the introduction, there's going to be another talk for the next couple of months at the end, last Wednesday of each month. And then once there's a very broad base of understanding about what's happening, we'll have workshops starting in May for those who are interested in trying to figure out, okay, how do we bring our creativity and our energy to helping with pushing this international campaign forward? And there are just so many things that a movement of young people around this can do that will be critical. I mean, just the ability to produce all kinds of the methods of raising awareness of short videos, figuring out what messages work. There's just a grinding aspect to campaigning for anything, let alone trying to campaign across the world in dozens of different countries with different social contexts, with different narratives and stories about corruption. So there's a lot of work to do to define for any given public audience, government audience in any different country, like how does the understanding of what the IACC would do fit with the problems of any given country? Who are the kleptocrats whose names will be known by the population that are the starting point for understanding why we need an international court to hold people accountable? How do we talk about in more simple terms like how the court would function? Because it's very simple to say, we need an international court that's going to hold people accountable when their national governments can't or will not, because they are controlled by leaders who abuse their power. That's very simple, but then when we start talking about all the things going into drafting the treaty, Justice Goldstone's work and others, it gets very complicated. And there are other international courts that have had real criticism leveled against them. So there are these mental anchors of the experiences of other international courts, and so it'll be very important to set expectations of what an international anti-corruption court can and can't do, and message how we get there. And so there are so many ways that people who come from all over the world can get involved in helping to tell those stories. And at a small NGO like ours at III, we simply can't do those things. We have to be very targeted and prioritize our time. And so there's are ways that young people can overnight greatly change the ability to reach more people and raise awareness.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights and thoughts. And to all of our panelists, we really appreciate it. I know there's probably lots of questions, so at this moment, please feel free to raise your hand or to put your question in the chat, whichever anyone prefers. And if people are still thinking of questions, feel free to take a few moments to come up with them. But Serena, I have a few questions for you since you gave such a wonderful presentation, if you want to answer a few questions while people are still thinking. Does that sound good, Serena?
Carly, I'd love.
Great. So you built an organization from the ground up. What advice would you give to other youth who have an idea but don't know where to start?
Don't think a lot, just go for it. I think sometimes fear, overthinking, thinking only of obstacles and not giving the same importance to possibility of, let's say, achievements and positive outcomes is always refrains people from moving forward. So if you have an idea and if you really believe that you have what it takes to make it work, don't count to three. This would be my advice as first one. And second one, and the most important, is always, 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 always surround yourself with people who have similar interests, people who really believe in change, people who really want to have an impact. Like, I'm so happy to have with us on the call today Nawal, Rida, and Charbel, who are part of the IACC team. And like, it's very clear, and I say it out loud, and I'm sure the Triple I team also, when they work on their own stuff, uh, being surrounded by the right people who have similar visions and goals takes you to further places than you usually can imagine of.
No, that's a really good point, and it is heavy work to do. So I think being surrounded by people who motivate you and empower you to do your best work, it's so important. We've talked a lot about the global nature of the IACC. Given likewise the global nature of YAC's initiatives, how do you navigate the cultural and regional differences to create a unified anti-corruption movement?
The pain is the same. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter what country, what context, what social background. When you suffer from corruption, it means you know what it means. It means you feel injustice. It means you feel that you are living in an unfair environment. It means you feel that trust has been abused, power has been abused. You feel that people do not get the same chances in life based on their skills, based on their will. And this, you don't need this, like the similar points are much more common than the, let's say, differences based on socioeconomic, sociocultural, or sociospatial difference. So departing from a common pain is a let's say, is a building stone to pushing for the establishment of the court, or pushing to opening dialogue and exchange of ideas, and thinking together on how we can make this court become a reality.
Thank you. And one more question, and I'd encourage people to write any question you have in the chat. There's no dumb question. That's why we're here. There was a lot I didn't know before, so please feel free to ask. But one other question I have for you is, as a consultant for sustainability and smart cities projects, how do you integrate anti-corruption measures into those? I think that's really cool to show how integrated corruption and the sustainable development goals really are. So would be awesome to hear your perspective on that.
Of course, you know, many publications in the past year, they were targeting, or they were focused on the interrelation between the development agenda and the anti-corruption agenda. The Agenda 2030, like highlights the role of SDG 16, which is about peace, justice, and strong institutions, and the importance of the fight against corruption for in order to push for Agenda 2030. I personally believe that corruption affects each and every development goal. It's not like, it cannot be one development goal. So each and every development goals should have a pillar that is focused on controlling and preventing corruption. For example, in IACC, sustainability as well is one of our pillars. For example, last year we did a project called React, where we focused a lot on corruption in the environment sector. By environment, we didn't limit ourselves only to climate change. It was about water, energy, transport, construction, architecture, city planning. So you cannot separate, in my opinion, three agendas. Not only, like, you cannot separate the sustainability agenda from the anti-corruption agenda from the human rights agenda. I believe these three agendas should come together. They should be tackled together, thought of together. And while we're designing solutions, we need to think of more comprehensive solutions that are more, let's say, thought in a way to push these three agendas forward.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And one more question for you. And again, please feel free to raise your hand or type a question in the chat. But how do you ensure inclusivity and diversity in IACC's projects, considering the diverse backgrounds of the youth involved?
I think it's thank you for the question. We always discuss how can we become more inclusive, because becoming inclusive is not a target; it's a work in progress. And the fight against corruption requires a lot of creativity. It requires not only multidisciplinary backgrounds, of course, like study backgrounds. I mean, also people who think differently, who are neurodiverse, whether who have like maybe special talents or do life in a different way. In every project we hold, we try as much as we can to be inclusive, to encourage neurodiversity, to encourage being inclusive. I mean, also in a physical way, like we try as much as we can to choose places, choose locations, or hold projects in places where everyone can have access to. Our team is very diverse as well. Like we have different people from different backgrounds, different socio-political, religious, economic backgrounds as well. And we believe that this led us to where we are today, because diversity as well is key if we are to have important impacts on the anti-corruption agenda.
Thank you so much. That's great to hear. And thank you for answering these few extra questions. I'd love to go back to Justice Goldstone for a moment. There was one question we didn't have time to ask you, but I am curious, are there specific mechanisms with the IACC that address the protection of whistleblowers and witnesses in corruption cases?
Well, certainly, Carly, as I've indicated already, the model treaty is going to have to deal with the protection of whistleblowers and witnesses. It's a crucial area. I would say, I'm guessing, but I would say 80 to 90% of corruption comes to light because of whistleblowers. It's certainly, and whistleblowers pay a huge price. The whistleblowers, unfortunately, have been assassinated. Whistleblowers have lost their employment. Whistleblowers aren't able to feed their families because they lose their jobs. Those who are corrupt in leadership positions are very dangerous people because they've got power. They've got power which they're prepared to use to protect themselves. So one can't overestimate the importance of protecting whistleblowers, and so too witnesses. When we began with the International Yugoslavia Tribunal, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, we were very concerned about witnesses. Sometimes you have one witness, and the people who are accused, the defendants, know that if they can take out that one witness, there's no case against them. So it's very difficult. And I remember once saying at a press conference early on in the life of the Yugoslavia Tribunal, I said the first witness who's killed could be the last witness. People are very easily frightened, and understandably. They threatened, and so are members of their family. So one has to go to make tremendous efforts in any criminal court. And it will certainly be so in the case of the International Anti-Corruption Court, that whistleblowers and witnesses will have to be protected. And witness protection is too often misunderstood. If you ask an American about witness protection, they think of somebody having plastic surgery, starting a new life in a different area, in a different country. But that's not how it works. We found in the case of the former Yugoslavia, there were witnesses in Bosnia who feared for their lives, but they didn't want to leave their homes. They didn't want to leave their families. So they need protection where they live. It's a very complex situation, and I'm pleased you've raised it.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's very helpful for all of us. I do see two questions in the chat, both from Carlos. How can regular citizens support the IACC agenda, as well as what would be the most important things for young people to have in mind while combating corruption? Ian, I'm not sure if this would maybe be a good question for you if you want to address this one.
Well, to the second part, in terms of keeping in mind about combating corruption, is to think first and foremost about yourself and the risks. You want to do something about the problem, but you also don't want to endanger yourself along the way. So understanding how to stay safe in different political environments, make careful decisions about that, and also think about, as we had an object lesson of on this call, also digital safety and security as well. So, and then in terms of, how can they get involved? I mean, I think working on international campaigns for something like the IACC, there's so many ways to do it. I mean, you can advocate on your own, you can work within your networks, you can inspire more people to take an interest. You can reach out to Margila and to us to figure out how to get more regularly involved, how to help, like I said before, with communications, raising awareness. There's many things you could do to, and many of which are very time efficient. But also I think too, with campaigning for a long-term idea as well, is to have, expectations about how long these things can take as well, and to not be discouraged by time and effort that it takes. And that by simply doing things on a regular basis, like sending one email a day, talking to someone, helping to spread the word, like those things might not result in immediate action, whether you're campaigning for national reforms in your own country or you're campaigning for an international court, but they are essential to reaching both of those goals. And so simply the act of doing can be a source of meaning and fulfillment towards addressing the problem instead of staying still and not doing anything. But that also results are long term, and keeping that in mind so that you're not feeling that your work is not meaningful. It always is meaningful. Every conversation is meaningful and every action is meaningful.
Thank you. Serena, do you have anything to share on this? Being so deeply in it at the moment, what would you say to youth of things that they should be thinking about before or while joining this fight?
Is to get informed, and I think this is the main reason behind these youth talks, is really to understand what is the scope that this court will cover. How can we be engaged? What type of issues can be raised? What is the process? How long? Setting the expectations as well, as Ian said. Like these things take time. They take years, sometimes less, sometimes more. So it's important to get involved. And I think with time and following this session, next session, and the one after, we will have a greater view together. Like we will build a vision together on how we can take this forward.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Are there any other questions from anyone on this call? Please feel free to raise your hand or to type it in the chat, and I'm happy to read it aloud. Great question, Carlos. Why did you personally decide to get involved in the fight against corruption? Really, any of our panelists, but feel free to start, Serena, if you want to.
I think it would be nice as well to hear from Carlos if he can share his story with everyone too on why he, because I know he has a very inspiring one on how he became interested and involved in the fight against corruption. As for me, as I mentioned in the, I saw the face you put on the chat, Carlos. So as I mentioned in the beginning, like I come from Lebanon, a country that I really love, but that I see a lot of problems on a daily basis. And it was impossible to wait for someone to do something or to save us or to create a more fair future. We waited, we had higher hopes, but then year after year, explosion after explosion, like our let's say our illusion, the illusion we had that one day some things are going to work out, one day things are going to become better, one day we will have a fairer future in this country. It disappeared with time, and we understood that the future lies in our hands, and that if we really want to build at least a more livable space, we need to start building it. So this is how we became involved and why we became interested.
Thank you so much. Carlos, if you want to share, please feel free.
Hello, everyone. Happy to see you, and we'll feeling very inspired by the conversation. Sadly, I had to join with a few minutes later than the beginning of the call. But thank you, Serena, for that pinpoint. As I did the question, it was mainly because I know the commitment and the passion that you guys have put, especially Margilia, Ian, that I have met personally. We also had a session a couple of months ago with Justice Goldstone. So I know that the way that we involve in the fight against corruption is not merely because some academic or professional endeavor, but rather because it touches human being, our very essence of humanity. And yeah, for me as well, in Venezuela, you may know that the problem of corruption, of ground corruption, is mainly one of the biggest issues in the world. For us, it is in every part of the society, whether it's environment, health, energy, any type of field in our country is sadly tainted with corruption. And for us as young people, we see that. Well, I'm not that young anymore, but for young people here in the country, of course, that this is something that tackles our very human, as I said, essence, and it is also something that is linked with our quality of life. And I think that's why we started working when I met Triple I back in 2018. I think that's why we started working on this, because we wanted to understand how really does corruption affects young people, not this grand scheme of things, but rather like why, how these affects our daily lives. And when you come to see it, it's in our everyday problems. Corruption. We had this campaign, I remember, a couple of years ago, that I think I mentioned in one of our calls, that corruption kills. Because we tend to think as corruption as only a problem of money or a problem of high officials, embezzlements, but it affects the problems of supply of water, food supplies, and every aspect of society. So I think that's why we also, in 1001 Ideas and the work that I do, I got involved in this as well, and I came to meet people as amazing as you guys. So yeah, happy to be here, happy to hear about you, and thank you for continuing this work. Back to you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We really appreciate it. I'm going to kick it back to Margiela right now to end the call.
Thank you so much, Carly, for such a robust and meaningful facilitation of our session today. Before we conclude today's fruitful discussion, let me express our sincere gratitude to our esteemed speakers, Serena, Ian, Justice Goldstone, and yourself, Carly, as a wonderful moderator, the IACC team for their incredible collaboration, and the attendees for all of the great question, which is another highlight of your commitment that we share to creating a world marked by accountability, transparency, and ethical governance. As we look forward to your continued participation in our upcoming talks, please mark your calendars. February 28th will be when we will hold our next Youth IACC Talks. In this talk, our key speakers will do a comparative analysis between International Criminal Court, International Court of Justice, and other international courts. So stay tuned for more info from me. And once I send along that information to all of you, please, I do encourage you to invite the youth within your network to attend, as we have created this so that most youth from around the world could benefit from these sessions. I once again thank you all for such an incredible and insightful conversation, and we are looking forward to seeing you in our next session on February 28th.